Welcome to today's Professional Series webcast. This is Dave Isbell from the MSU Alumni Association, and I am very happy to introduce you to Ryan Claytor. Ryan is a comic artist and professor living in Lansing, Michigan. As a creator, he is best known for his self-published autobiographical comic book series, And Then One Day. In 2009, he began teaching the first comics and visual narratives class at Michigan State, and this is where students get to create visual narratives and critically discuss the artistic, instructional, and narrative capacities of comics. We're so happy to have Ryan here today, and can't wait to hear what he has to share. With that, Ryan, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks so much, David. How am I coming through?
Sound great.
Okay. So welcome to Small Press Professionalism. We're going to talk about a couple of topics today, but before we begin, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my experience so you know who the heck is talking to you about all this stuff. So I started teaching at various universities and colleges in California shortly after my undergrad, and in 2008, my wife and I moved to Michigan, where I currently teach at both Michigan State University and University of Michigan Flint. I started out self-publishing my own autobiographical series of comics. So these original ones I was personally hand printing, folding, stapling, and distributing, and to my surprise, when they sold out, people wanted more. So I compiled those into a collected edition, which you see here. After that, I moved on to the next book, And Then One Day number 5, which was more of an illustrated journal rather than comics. And Then One Day number 6, which you see here, was sort of a hybrid autobiography / documentary take on comics. And number 7, 8, and 9 that you see here are part of a 3-part story arc that I recently compiled into a collected edition just a couple months back. So this is my most recent book. I've also done a few tours. The first one that I attempted in 2007 and completed was the largest self-published comic book tour ever attempted. This is when I hit about 18 states and a couple Canadian provinces and stopped at about 50 different stores, museums, universities, and libraries along the way. I've since done a few others, and to date I have now signed my books in all 48 contiguous states. So that's who's going to be talking to you today. We are going to be talking about, like I said, a couple different topics. One is going to be large project productivity. How do you keep your motivation high when working on large projects? And secondly, once you're done with your large project, how do you go about printing your book? This is kind of geared toward comic book writers and artists. So we'll be talking about book printing after this. So we'll start out with large project productivity. So to start out, you want to determine your goal. So when is your project due? Now, this was something that I practiced with my advanced comics class last semester. And so when we started out, I told them, you want to start broad. It's kind of like outlining a story because, I was talking with mainly creative types, and I'm guessing that's who I have in the audience here today. So I know that this logistical stuff is not usually something that artists excel at, but maybe if you start thinking about it as something more creative, like the creative process for writing a comic book, starting broad, what is your due date? When does this thing need to be done? So for us, it was April 16th or the last day of the semester. We needed to have our book done. So I axed that date and pulled it back by a couple weeks. And in that time, they had to have 24 pages of comics completed. So that's something handy to do. When you have a due date, tell yourself that it's a little bit earlier, just so you give yourself a little buffer in case anything should happen. So at that point in time, we had from January 24th to April 2nd to make 24 pages of comics. Again, this is my advanced comics class I'm talking about here. So I gave them minus 1 week for spring break. I did not expect them to work over their spring break. They could if they wanted to, but I certainly wasn't going to force that. So that equaled 9 weeks. So from that point, we needed to understand our work per week average. So again, making this akin to the creative process, we started getting more specific after we started out really broad. So it's kind of like honing your story outline down to a script. So 24 pages in 9 weeks comes out to about 2 2/3 pages per week. So we rounded up to 3 pages a week is what we needed to complete every single week. So always round up. Again, this just gives you a little bit more of a buffer. If you rounded down, you would really be scrambling at the end. You also want to set sub-goals, and these sub-goals are even more specific. So we moved from outlining a story to scripting, and now panel breakdowns. So these sub-goals are less daunting than your larger task. So instead of thinking, oh my God, I have to create 24 pages of story of illustrated comics, now you can think about, okay, well, we break that down into, at least in this class, we broke it down into 8-page increments or trimesters or sub-goals. So these 8-page sub-goals were a little easier to digest for the students and for any practicing artist. So it's important for morale boost. When you're working on this larger project, it can be easy to get overwhelmed. And so if you can come up with anything to help move you along, give yourself basically avoid this psychological toll for larger projects, and even develop a reward system for this morale boost. Like maybe when you finish those 8-page trimesters or whatever sub-goal you've given yourself, you say, okay, well, I am going to allow myself a day of break, or I'm going to go play some pinball, or in my case, I like cupcakes. So at the end of my sub-goals, I would go and get a cupcake, or 3. So moving on to planning your week. Again, this is the most specific. So we've been sort of honing and honing and honing as we go along, thinking about how we're going to complete this larger project. So this is, kind of akin to illustrating characters and settings within the panels after you do your breakdowns. So you want to start using a calendar, and it is imperative that this has hourly increments. If it doesn't, it's kind of useless. So it doesn't really matter whether you want to go analog or digital, but let's say you start out with an analog calendar. There are many different choices, and here's one you could look at, but if you take a close look at this calendar, all it has is the day and date and no hourly breakdowns. So if you see something like this, forget about it. Here's an example of a daily planner that not only has hourly increments, but is broken down by 15-minute increments. So this is something that's actually going to be useful for you to plan out your day. So when purchasing an analog calendar, consider these things. Size. You want this thing to be portable so that you can carry it around with you to class or work or a meeting or wherever you happen to go. If it's big and cumbersome, you're not going to use it. Think about cost. Sometimes these analog calendars get a little bit pricey, so you might shop around or even start looking online. Layout is a consideration. As we mentioned before, it's got to have those hourly increments, otherwise it's not going to work for you. And availability. Analog calendars are starting to become more scarce with the advent of digital daily planners. So again, you might have to go to a few stores to find what you want, or even look online. Or you can go the digital route, which is what I'm doing these days. And this is a calendar of mine from a while back. You can see it's from 2010. And I have this calendar color-coded so that I can see, okay, in green I have my Michigan State University classes, and in blue I have my University of Michigan Flint classes. The grays and other colors are other stuff I'm doing, and then I have carved out in here 5 hours every week where I am going to make comics. That's the bright yellow happy color, so I know when I get to that. These days I've switched over to start using Google Calendar, which is an online calendar-based system that allows you to do everything one of those PDAs used to do. And this used to present kind of a setback for me because I really like that color coding system that you could work into PDAs. But thankfully, as of a recent update, Google Calendar now allows you to color code. Thank you, Google. So here we see my current calendar, and zooming in here just a little bit to show it to you. And like I said, this is an online-based calendar system, so it's free, and it's also syncable. So not only if you're sitting at home on your desktop computer or at work on your computer or using your laptop in your living room, you can also sync it to any sort of device like your cell phone or your tablet or iPad or what have you. So when planning out this calendar, you want to make sure that you're making time for creating your required number of comics pages per week. So for my class, it was their 3 pages of comics every week. I'm assuming that my students also had other school obligations to take into consideration. So don't forget about that, even though their other school obligations were probably not as important as my class. Homework for those other not as important classes, and some of them might have jobs. And I like to remind my students to maybe even consider a workout. Comics making is a really solitary and sedentary way of creating art. You're sitting in a room by yourself in one location, not moving for a long period of time. So I personally try to work in some sort of an exercise routine, and I encourage my students to do the same. And then this next one might sound silly, but don't forget fun. All work and no play. You know what happens then. We don't want to become dull boys, so make sure you work in some fun and also some eating and sleeping. Occasionally I'd have students come in and show me their calendar, which I require them to do, and they'd craft these really great 20-hour days, and I would ask them, well, when are you going to have lunch, or how many hours do you like to sleep every night? And inevitably we'd have to restructure their schedule. So even though it may sound weird, don't forget to work that in as well. And then modify as needed. Don't get discouraged if change is required in your calendar. I can pretty much guarantee you it's not going to be perfect the first time. So figure out what is not working, and then make a personal assessment after each week. And in fact, schedule it into your weekly plan. So if you take a look at my schedule here and we hone in on this particular block on Friday, you can see that here I'm planning and filtering my tasks for the upcoming week. So every single week I reevaluate what I did the prior week and how I can make things run a little more smoothly the following week and make alterations because of it. So continue to hone your schedule and find out what works for you. So here's a bunch of stuff for large project productivity, and I have a few other suggestions that I think might help you out. So here's some additional considerations. Know your working habits. So if you cater to your preferences, it tends to keep your excitement and motivation for this big project high, which is what you need to keep working. If you grow complacent about a project and aren't as interested in it, you're not going to keep working. So anything you can do to fool your psyche into maintaining that motivation, do it. So maybe you work better in the morning. If that's true, then take that into consideration for your schedule. Maybe you go to sleep earlier and wake up very early in the morning to start your work. Or are you a night owl? So maybe you do the opposite. Do you work best for long periods of time or multiple short bursts? If you work best for long periods of time, I've heard people who can schedule their 40-hour work weeks all on the first 4 days of the week, and then they have their Fridays free. Or maybe you work best in multiple short bursts. So if that's the case, then be ready to work at a moment's notice and use any short bit of time you have, maybe in between meetings, in between classes, etc. Or do you work best after being inspired? So maybe you find yourself after having read a comic book or looking at some artwork by some of your favorite artists, feeling really anxious to work on your own projects. If that's the case, then work that into your schedule. Maybe you have only an hour where you're working on your project, your comic book, let's say. If that's the case, then schedule the first 15 minutes to read a book by your favorite author or artist, and then the latter 45 minutes you'll be really jazzed about working on your own stuff. I also encourage people to use a productivity chart. So this is a chart that I handed my students for that advanced comics class that I mentioned. So as we look through here, you see every 2 to 3 days, you can see the weeks running along the bottom line here, and then the number of pages running up the left-hand side. So every 2 to 3 days, they needed to complete another page of comics, and this is the average that they had to maintain in order to complete the 24 pages by the end of those 9 weeks. So in order to make this work, you start logging in essentially how many pages you've completed on any particular day. So maybe they forgot about it for the first day, and then they completed a page over the next couple days. So they log that in, and you can see on this productivity chart, it's kind of overlaid. So the white chart that you see here is the student's productivity. So they make 1 page, and then over the next couple days they only make a half a page. Maybe they only penciled it and didn't ink it, and then they think to themselves, okay, well, now it's the weekend, I've got a couple days to catch up, so I'm really going to work hard. So they complete a page and a half, and the next one logged in as a page, and then they got some more motivation, worked on a page and a half, so now they're back up to schedule. This is where they need to be. As it progresses, you keep logging in your pages. Maybe you completed 2 pages, so now you're ahead of schedule. And you keep that going so you can see how your productivity is comparing with the average productivity that you need to maintain. There's a few little plateaus that you see along the way here as well. So the first plateau and the third plateau that you see are those sub-goals that I mentioned before. So we had those 8-page trimesters that we needed to have 8 pages completed in every 3 weeks. So after 3 weeks, I gave them a little bit of a break just so that they could have a breather, and it was part of that incentive program that you yourself can work into your larger projects. So this productivity chart acts as a morale boost to see your progress. You can see your mini goals as they happen. And conversely, it can also be a shameful reminder of how unproductive you've been. So instead of waiting for 3 weeks to realize that you're really behind on your project, if you force yourself into logging your progress every day or two, you'll see a visual representation of how you are achieving your goals or not. It also allows you to understand your capabilities as an artist, which is really important. So maybe you've completed this schedule and now you see that, okay, you were able to, with some peaks and valleys, essentially maintain this average level of progress. And were you able to do that easily? Okay, well, maybe you could do more. Were you able to do that just by the skin of your teeth? Okay, then that's probably about your limit. So maybe somebody comes to you with a proposal. Like, let's say, hey, I would like you to make 24 pages of comics for me, and I'll pay you $500 to do it. This is a proposal that I have had, my students have had come to them, and initially to students this may sound like, wow, $500, I would like that, so let's agree to this. But I tell them to put on the brakes for a second and do a little bit of math. So let's hide this number up here for just a second and think about it. So $500 divided by 24 pages of comics equals, let's see here, carry the 1, 72, 18. Oh yeah, it's only $20.83 per page. Okay, well, to a student, again, that might sound like a decent rate. But again, let's do some more math. We're essentially talking about per page. So what does that work out to per hour? Well, I don't know about you, but in order to create a page of comics, it takes me at least 8 hours. For somebody faster, it might be less. Maybe it's 4 hours. Let's take an average of that and just say about 6 hours to create a page of comics. All right, so more math. $20.83 divided by that average 6 hours per page. That comes to $3.40 per hour. Per hour. That's what they want to pay you. So just to put this into perspective, Michigan's minimum wage right now is $7.40 an hour. Depending upon what state you are in, it may fluctuate a little higher or even a little lower. But essentially, they're saying, hey, I would like to hire you for less than half of minimum wage to do my project. Now, if you weren't keeping up your productivity chart, you wouldn't know quite how long it takes you to do something, or how to work out this math so that you could figure, okay, I can produce a page in this amount of time. Is this worth my while? So again, this productivity chart is really important for allowing you to understand your capabilities as an artist. It also helps you set more realistic and refined strategic goals for your future projects. Another thing that helps with large project productivity is working with motivated people. So if you have some artists, friends who are doing similar work, maybe you can plan a trip to somewhere like a coffee shop so that you have a more social outlet, maybe even a restaurant. Again, the restaurant gets a little more tricky because some are not used to people camping out there for hours at a time. So if it's a trendy restaurant with high turnover and moving a lot of people through, maybe not the best place to have an artist get together. But there are plenty of restaurants who would be happy to have your business and allow you to use a table for a few hours. Or, if you're students, there are plenty of nooks and crannies hidden in every school where you can gather with your friends and work on your projects. And I'm sure you can come up with a million other places. Like, for example, I accompanied my wife to a speaking engagement she had in California. So the school where she was speaking put us up in a hotel, and they had this high-rise bar on the top floor that wasn't being used during the day, and I went up there, and I think it was probably the most memorable comic book making experience of my life, looking out over the panoramic view of Los Angeles, California with my page of comics in front of me. So be ready for new and unexpected places to do that as well. So again, it makes you feel a little more social while still staying productive, because as we mentioned, this comic book making thing or artistry in general is usually kind of a solitary activity. And know your working habits. And I say this because I have things that I can do better in a group than I can on my own, and vice versa. For example, when I am scripting a comic, I need complete and utter silence. It's like writing a book, and I can't do that when there's distractions. And for me, I know my habits, I have to have the same conditions when I'm penciling my page of comics. But when I'm inking my comics or lettering them or even coloring them, that I can have distractions. So music or even conversations with friends are all okay for those activities. So whenever I get together with my buddies and go out for a social activity like this, I make sure that I've got an entire page of comics penciled and I am ready to go with the ink hitting the page when we get there. So can you work while talking? Like I mentioned, some of these activities maybe you can, and others maybe not. But this comes with a caveat. You do not want to work with people who are socialites. All they want to do is talk. When you get in this situation, they just sort of forget that the page of comics or their art is in front of them, and they just want to be a Gabby McGabberton. Or maybe you know somebody who is a whiner. Oh, the art is so hard, and this is so difficult, and woe is me. Again, you want to keep the atmosphere kind of light and positive and productive, and it's kind of hard to do that when you're working with one of these types of folks. Or the non-worker. I've had artist buddies who, when we get together, they don't bring their stuff, or they forget it on multiple occasions, or they just sit there and don't do any work. Again, this is a group designed to be productive. So talking and conversation is fabulous, but make sure that you guys are all working. Again, if not everybody is, then it makes it harder for the rest of the group. And the flake. Maybe you've gotten together, or tried to form a get-together and somebody repeatedly makes a commitment to show up and they don't. That can weigh on your psyche too. So here's some more stuff to remember when working on large projects that might help you out get to your final completed goal. So that's the first part of this small press professionalism lecture. And the second part is, once you're done with your large project, like a comic book, how do you go about printing your book? Well, there's a couple of things to consider when printing your book, like printing methods. So first of all, you want to figure out if you're doing POD or offset printing. And let me demystify those terms real quickly. POD, or print on demand printing, is usually when you have less than 1,000 copies of something to print. If you're going to print more than 1,000 copies, that's when you go to offset printing. So print on demand is sort of like a glorified copy machine. You spit it out using a laserjet printer like you would at a professional copy shop like FedEx, Kinko's, Office Max, Staples, etc. Offset printing is professional printing. This is something you use from a large print house. Usually these printers are like the size of a Mack truck, and but this is not to say that if you're not going to print 1,000 copies that you should feel bad about this. When I first started making comics, as I mentioned before, these first 4 mini comics of mine were all hand printed, hand folded, hand stapled. I was either printing at my local copy shop or using university resources that I had available to me at the time, and hand assembling them and hand distributing them. After I did print runs anywhere from 200 to 800 copies of these, I sold out, and when people wanted more, that's when I made my offset printed copy, and I think I printed a couple thousand copies of these. So that was the time at which I was finally able to get my book professionally printed. So don't feel bad about small runs of books when you first start. Start out with small runs, develop an audience, then when more people are interested in your books, then print more books. So regardless of whether you're printing on demand or using offset printing, you want to start by soliciting quotes. So that means you're going to contact many different printers and ask them, how much is it going to cost to print my books? So different printers specialize in different areas. So if you get a printer that comes back with a high quote, don't be offended. They probably just don't specialize in what it is that you do. Some shops will specialize in print on demand. Some shops will specialize in offset. Even within offset printing shops, some will specialize in flyers or broadsheets, where others specialize in book production or binding. So they're probably going to be cheaper printers. So it serves you well to get lots of different quotes from lots of different printers. This next one is kind of funny, but it's something that I kind of had to learn the hard way, so I wanted to allow you to learn it the easy way, which is be nice. In the beginning, when I first started printing my books, I thought, okay, I'm going to play hardball, and I'm going to let them know I mean business, and it didn't work out for me. If you could put yourself in the shoes of a printer or somebody who's quoting, who are you going to do a favor to at the end of the day? Somebody who tried to play hardball and tell you how it was going to be, or are you going to do a favor to somebody who was a decent human being to you? So don't forget that these printers and people who are giving you these quotes are people too. So be nice when you call them. Also, know your book specifications when you're ready to call the printers. So let's go through a list of specifications that you'll need to know about your books. First of all, know how many books you want to print. Know your quantity. And let's say I want to print 1,000 books. Okay, when you go in with your quantity of books, don't just ask for a quote for 1,000 books. Ask them for price breaks at a range of quantities. So if it's 1,000 books, ask for a quote from 500, 1,000, and 2,000 books. This may seem a little overkill. If all you want is 1,000 books, then why would you want twice as many? Well, if the increase is only pennies on the book for your additional 1,000 copies, you might just go ahead and pull the trigger on twice as many copies, because now you have a bunch more that you can send out to reviewers or give out as samples at a convention. The more books you have, the more you can do with them. So ask for a range of quantities when you get your quote. Paper stock is another consideration when printing your books. Essentially, this means the weight or thickness of the paper. You can get different colors of paper. You can even get different textures of paper. And all of this kind of serves to add a little personality to the book. You can make it a little more unique, and hopefully along with that format change, it will serve to enhance the content of the book as well. However, it can also affect your quote. So if there's a specialty paper that you want, but it's not something that they carry, then it might increase the price of your quote considerably. So think about asking for in-house paper stocks. What is a common paper stock that they already carry? And they can provide you with that. So ask for samples. What kinds of papers do they have? What kinds of papers can they provide to you? And they'll be happy to show you. And conversely, if there is something specific that you want, you can show them examples too. Like bring in a book and say, hey, this is a paper stock that I'd really like to emulate. What do you have here that I could use that's similar? You also want to think about the number of inks used when printing a book. Again, this is another thing that's going to affect the price of your book. So 4-color printing, CMYK, or cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, these are the 4 colors that are used to form a full spectrum of color in printed matter. So 4-color printing is the most you're going to print. Probably, occasionally, you'll do 6 or 8-color prints, but not often. So I'm going to start with 4-color printing. 4-color printing is full color process, and like I said, when you mix these colors together, you can get a wide range of colors. Just to kind of show you how this works, this is a page of one of my comics. This is a page from my wedding comic. And let's zoom in here to this top panel. And when this is printed, if we zoom in even further, you can kind of see how these 4 different colors, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, mix together to form this multitude of colors. So you can see here, this is a zoom in of the minivan and the person walking, made up of a bunch of little dots or halftones, as they call them. And when they mix together, they form all these different colors. So 4-color printing is full color, probably going to be the most expensive out of any of these ink choices you have. So with that said, another option you have is duotoned books, or only 2 colors of ink on a page. And while that may sound limiting at first, I wanted to show you a few examples of that so you can see what people have done with duotone prints. This is an example of James Sturm's The Golem's Mighty Swing, and this is a dark brown ink with a light brown ink printed on a beige paper. You can see it has this kind of antiquated, antiqued look to it. This is a page from Seth's Clyde Fans. Seth is a Canadian cartoonist, and he's used a couple colors on this page. We've got the black ink and a light desaturated blue ink, and that is printed on kind of a cream paper. And using different screens and tones, you can see he really gets a wide range of color in here and different values. So you can use these couple of colors to your advantage. These are a few pages from my book, And Then One Day number 5. This is that illustrated journal that I mentioned. And you can do different things with this 2-color process. Like you see here, these are not printed on a beige paper. These are printed on white paper and printed with a dark brown and a beige colored ink. The characters in here are all left the white of the page, so they are kind of highlighted and they pop off the page. They're what I wanted your eye to look at. So when I was creating these, it was actually cheaper to print 2 colors on a white page than it was to print one color on a beige page. So I just made that second flood color the color of the page that I wanted, and made things a little cheaper for myself. And these are some examples from my most recent book. I wanted to show you some comparisons between the original line art and the final duotoned page. And here's another example as well. So again, you can see those characters highlighted using the white of the page. I used the same technique here that I did for that previous book I showed you. Or you can take it down to simply one color, which is going to be your cheapest option. Now, if this is all you can afford, there is no shame in printing single color. In fact, many artists before you have printed using simply black ink on white paper. For example, here are some pages from Craig Thompson's Blankets. He's a virtuoso comic book artist, and I just wanted to show you a few of the pages from his book to show you that you don't need color to make a really striking page of comics. This is a page from Robert Crumb's Genesis. He illustrated the first chapter of the Bible, all in comic book form, and you can see this really amazingly meticulous cross-hatched rendered page that we have here that's incredibly striking, again using only one color ink, black on white page. But one color doesn't mean that you have to print black ink on white paper. You could switch it up and print one color of ink on white paper. So here's an example from Dan James, and it's called Mosquito. And you can see the entire book is printed with this red ink on a white page. Here he's taken the form of the book, which is this red ink, and allowed it to sort of have this conversation with the content of the book, which is the blood that the mosquito will suck, and it's all done in this red ink. Another book from Dan James, The Octopi in the Ocean, this time printed with blue ink on a white page. So you have a lot of leeway even with using a single color ink on white paper. Or you could also think about printing colored ink on a color paper. You're still only using one color of ink. This is Will Eisner's A Contract with God, and when he made this, he decided to make this a dark brown ink printed on a beige colored paper to give it that more antiquated look. And getting back to our book specifications, page counts is another thing that you want to think about. So again, when you call up the printer and ask them for a quote, this is one of the questions they'll ask you. How many pages is your book? Now, with that said, let's say that you've illustrated your book and it's 53 pages long. If that's the case, you might have to be ready to print a little more or a little less. And this is because books are made using what they call signatures. And a signature is a collection of pages made by folding a larger piece of paper a number of times and cutting the edges, essentially. So you'll end up with these little booklets within a book that's printed, and those are usually 8, 16, 32 pages. So if your book is not easily divided by one of those numbers, then you might have to bump up your page count a little bit. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's going to be the same amount of money to print that number of pages. You'll just have a few extra to work with. So you might be able to include some sketches or behind the scenes process information or about the author section, or even a promotional page advertising more of your work. So if people like the book that they read, then they can give you more of their money. So this is just another thing to think about before you talk to the printer. So after you do all that, after you talk to lots of different printers and get lots of different quotes and you have all these prices in front of you, your job is not done. Make them fight with each other. Select the top several least expensive quotes that you've received and pit them against each other like battle bots. This is the really fun part of the business side for me. I like this part. I like talking with people and trying to get a bargain for myself. So essentially what you do, once you have your quotes all laid out in front of you, you call up printer A and you say, hello printer A, this is Ryan. I called you about that book quote. Just want to let you know that printer B was able to come in a little under you. They gave me this price. Are you able to beat them? And they might say yes. And if you do, you say, okay, thanks. I'll call you back. Hey, printer B, printer A was able to come in a little lower than you. Can you beat their price? Yes? Okay, great. Call you back. Hey, printer A, printer B is willing to do this for me. And you continue that until you hit the rock bottom price that you can get. So again, don't take these quotes for face value. They have a little bit of wiggle room there. So essentially, you've got something that they want. Money. So you have some power in this situation. So use that power to your advantage in order to get your quotes down a little bit more. So once you have that rock bottom price and you're unable to get them down any further, you're not done yet. Think about some additional discounts even after you've got them at that rock bottom price. Well, what in the world could you do to get them any lower after you've called them all up and chiseled them down? Well, you might mention the printer in your book for a discount. So essentially you're providing the printer with some free advertising. Now this does not mean that you provide them with a full page ad and it's very commercial, because I know that many artists do not want commercial properties in their book. So if that's the case, you could even propose, hey, printer A, I've decided to go with you, but I'm wondering if maybe you'll give me a little discount if I mention you in the indicia of my book. So the indicia, if you're not familiar, is that legal text at the start of a book that everyone just kind of skips past and doesn't read anyway. The copyright date, the author, who it's by, all that stuff. So you can include printed by printer A in Lansing, Michigan, in that indicia, and then it's just sort of hidden in there with all the other text. The printer is happy because they get a mention in the book. You're happy because you get a little more of a discount. And on top of that, if their name is in the book, then they've got a little more incentive to do a good job of printing this thing if their name's associated with it. So it's kind of a win-win all the way around. So don't forget that final discount. I've managed to knock off another few $100s of my printing quotes, even after, the make 'em fight part of printing your book, just by mentioning a printer in my indicia. And that's not the end. You can even get some more discounts if you ask about a referral program. So this is kind of like asking for discounts into the future. So I've printed my books and I exhibit them at conventions and I sell on my website, and inevitably I'll get people coming up to me and saying, hey, this is a really nicely printed book. Where did you get this done? And you can do one of two things. You can tell them where you got it printed, or you can tell them and get a little kickback for it. So ask your printer, hey, if I direct other people to you, do you have any sort of incentive program? Would you give me 10% or 5% off of my next printing with you? And many of them will say yes. So if that's the case, be happy about telling other people where you got your book printed and say, hey, I got it printed at printer A in Lansing, Michigan. And when you go to them, just tell them that Ryan Claytor sent you. And then you can get a little more kickback for future stuff. Okay, so that's about all I've got for you. I think we're at about 45 minutes here. So I wanted to turn it over to some Q&A period in the last 10 or 15 minutes that we have. Before I turn it loose to David, if there's any questions, I wanted to mention that on my website I have a listing of several small press professionalism articles. If you liked what you saw here, you might like what you see there as well. So David, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ryan. I think that was really good information. I think it could be generalizable for a lot of people in a lot of different occupations. So thank you so much for sharing that. I do have a couple questions for you, if you don't mind. So in the beginning, you're talking about kind of the project and tackling the project. So what's the best way? How do you find a muse? I mean, if you just can't get started, you've got an idea and you just can't get past that. How do you deal with that?
Huh. That's a good question. I think I have the opposite problem. The longer that I work in comics, the more ideas that I generate, and the more ideas I know that I'm never going to be able to get to in my entire life. So for me, it's more of a process of honing the ideas that I do have. But if you're having trouble finding that muse, you might start thinking about ways to inspire yourself. Maybe that's reading existing books. Maybe it's thinking about a topic that you're really passionate about. Maybe it's a political stance that you have, and you want to find a story that you can craft around that to make sort of an allegory about it. Or maybe you think about things a little bit more generally, like if you're having troubles coming up with characters, you might think about archetypes like seasons, fall, winter, summer, spring, and how can you make these characters fit those archetypes? And there's many, many different archetypes. Like you could think about chess pieces. What sort of personalities do these different chess pieces have, and how might they contribute to your own character's personalities? And then you also kind of have something to fall back on when you're writing your characters. Like maybe you're not quite sure how that character would act in a particular situation. Well, if someone's the queen and they have, limitless possibilities and power, how would they act in comparison to a pawn who has a very limited moving ability and not a lot of power? But they were forced into the same situation. And also, how do those characters kind of bounce off each other?
Good tips. So in your scenario, you're saying, okay, I've got a million ideas. Then how do you know which one to pick? Because you only have a certain amount of time.
That's a good question. I try to keep a log of these different ideas that I have, like while I'm working on a project and I come up with other ideas for stuff I want to do. Keep that handy, and then when I'm ready to work on that next project, then I'll go through this list and kind of hone down things that I want to do. And usually my interest will peak around one or two of them. And personally, because I self-publish my own work, I don't have to think about the commercial viability of them. So usually I'm just going with, as you said, my muse. What am I most interested in producing? I produce a series of autobiographical comics, so I've been able to do pretty much anything I want for these 10 years I've been producing comics. For my next project, I want to produce a story about my father growing up in very rural Arizona shortly after the formation of the state. He lived on dirt floors and grew up in railroad boxcars and had beans from a pressure cooker blow holes in the side of his boxcar house, and all of this stuff that I think is really exciting and pretty difficult for us to relate to today. So that's kind of my next big project that I'm really excited about getting to. Maybe you can hear in the tone in my voice that I really get excited when I talk about this project. So maybe you can kind of think about the same thing when you're going through your list of project, or maybe you're telling your wife or your girlfriend or your friends about these projects. Is there one that really gets you excited that you're going to be able to maintain this motivation for this larger project? If so, maybe that's the project you should tackle.
So when you are independently working, I mean, you do have some flexibility there. So if it is more commercial, so say you use the example of someone wanting to pay $500 for a 24-page comic. Well, they have an idea and they just want your talent to make it come to light, right? So then you have a different situation. So you're working for somebody else. How can you kind of interject yourself into that, but still kind of keep true to what they want you to do?
Yeah, I think the key there is really picking projects that interest you as well. If somebody's paying you to do this creative project, it's going to take time away from your own projects, and you need to be excited about working with someone too. So any projects that I've worked on with friends or other creative folks have been with people that I know, and it's a topic that interests both of us. Like right now I'm working on I have a buddy who is a comics reviewer, and in the past we've both talked about how it would be really interesting to see reviews about comics done in comics form. Now, he is not an artist, and I really don't want to spend my time writing reviews about comics, but together we can kind of make this thing happen that we're both interested in. So this is an idea that's formed from conversations between a writer and myself, a writer-artist. So again, I'd probably just reiterate, make sure this project is something that you're interested in too, because even if the money is good, if you're not excited about it, your interest is going to wane, and it's just going to be difficult to make your way through something like that.
Well, so as a kind of a practical element, every artist has the question in front of them, where's my next paycheck coming from? Do you have any tips on getting funding, or maybe particularly, like, I know you've written some on crowdsourcing. Like, do you have any words of wisdom you could pass on to people who are in that scenario?
Yeah, find a way to make your craft marketable, I would say. So I teach several classes in several different art making several different media. So I've taught classes in web design, production design, Photoshop, Illustrator, in addition to introductory art classes, 2D art, a wide range of things. So teaching is my main form of income, but you also mentioned crowdsourcing, and I recently tried my hand at that for the first time and was able to raise several $1,000s to print my most recent book. In order to make a crowdfunding successful, I think it's pretty important to have an established readership or fan base. I hesitate to call people fans. I feel like I don't have fans, but I have people who read my stuff. It just sort of sounds like a weird term to me. Anyway, it's good to have that base of people who know your stuff before you hop into crowdfunding. So for me, I was doing comics for almost 10 years and going around to conventions and selling my stuff in stores, and had an online store before I launched this crowdfunding campaign. And even then, I was kind of nervous. Am I going to be able to meet this goal? And thankfully I was, based on the generosity of all these readers that have enjoyed my stuff in the past. So that was a really humbling experience. But I would say probably crowdfunding without a readership is a risky thing to do. So I'd say probably establish a readership before you do something.
So what I'm hearing in that is that put a lot of effort into the work and get yourself in the right place at the right time, kind of thing, because you did a lot of touring around and going to conventions and putting yourself in front of people. How can people make the most of their time if they're, say, at a convention or an artist signing, or trying to get their local comic store to buy their work or something? How can they do that efficiently?
I'd say the way to make the most out of any of those means of interacting with people is to keep a record of it. Get to know the person, whether it's in front of a convention table or touring or meeting a new store owner. Introduce yourself, say hello, and don't just talk about your own work. Be interested in them too, genuinely. And once you get to know each other, you can talk about your work, and if they seem interested and they purchase something, at my convention table, everywhere I go, I have an email list, and it's not something that I'm real carny huckster about, step right up, sign this list so that I can email you. It's more like, oh, you just purchased my book and you seem kind of interested. I don't know if you'd like to receive an email or not, but I have this quarterly email update. I swear I only hit you 4 times a year, just letting you know about new books coming out, convention appearances, and stuff like that. And if they want to sign up, great, there's a pin. And if they don't, no hard feelings. At least I gave them sort of a small and somewhat passive pitch to signing up on this list. And over the course of these 10 years of making comics and conventioneering, I've now got an email list of over 2,000 people that I send out an email to quarterly. So they know about new books coming out, or in the case of my crowdfunding campaign, 2,000 people instantly knew that I was doing this crowdfunding thing. And the same thing is true with retailers. The comic book sales folks are your frontline men and women. You're not going to sell your books very efficiently without them. So anytime I meet a new store owner, or I'm on tour and I stop at a new store, I get to know the owners or managers, and I get their contact information, their email address, and ask them if it would be all right to put them on this quarterly email update that I send out. And I also keep a list of just retailers, so that if there's something retailing specific that I want to send out, then I have them there as well.
Okay, good tips. I have one last question for you. So this is, we are re-recording this for those of you who are live and hearing this, because the first time we did this, our internet dropped across campus. So thank you, Ryan, for doing this again. So it is now post-homecoming, and so you and I have had the good fortune to spend some time hearing Jeff Johns speak, and in your case, getting to kind of ask him in front of people questions, and also you hosted him in your comics class, and Jeff gave a lot of really good information this week. I'm curious to hear what, if you might summarize for people who are listening to this, what are some new ideas that you took away or that you heard from your students that came from Jeff, that people might be able to apply?
Probably for me, the most enlightening interaction with Jeff Johns was with my classroom, and it was a pretty unique and intimate engagement with him. It was essentially a dozen of my students and Jeff Johns, and we got to ask him about his process and writing, and he really broke down his process in such a way that you could see the craftsmanship behind writing. I think a lot of that, when done well, gets lost and overlooked. You don't really see that there's a structure behind this. When you get wrapped up in a story that's that good, you just kind of get swept along with the narrative. And so it was interesting to see him think about, initially each character and what is their motivation, and even breaking it down into a single ethos or motto for that character. He talked about the character Shazam and relaunching Billy Batson, and Billy was this wholly good character prior to him getting his hands on him, and his new motto for Billy Batson was, Billy Batson is trouble. And from there, he was able to go on and explain why he was this troubled kid, being shifted around through all these orphanages. And at the same time, while he's troubled, he still had this, underlying good personality, which is why he was chosen for this superpower, essentially. And then he went on to break down not only characters, but script, and also page-by-page breakdown of what actions are going to happen for X number of pages, and how is that going to fit within the confines of a 22-page comic book. So that was probably the most enlightening thing for me. I wish that we were recording that. Did we record that? That would have been
in hindsight,
really
I wish I would have recorded that, because I did not expect that. Jeff gave the master class there, and I wish that we would have recorded that. I'm sure many of your students took notes, so I hope that maybe you can make them turn them into you as an assignment or something. But it was fantastic. I walked out of there feeling like, wow, I want to write a comic book now. And Jeff turned to me and said, it's easy, you should do it. And I was like, okay, yeah. But it was a great time.
I think everyone felt that. I talked with Jeff's girlfriend afterward, and she said pretty much the exact same words. Was it his wife? I'm sorry. His wife said pretty much the exact same words. I feel like I want to go write right now. I think everybody felt that.
Yeah, it was terrific, and I just wish we would have thought to record that. It's in my mind, and what you just broke down was a good summary of kind of the larger theme. But I wanted to pull that out in this discussion because I think it would be really relevant. I mean, Jeff really gave the master class. And one of the things that I heard him say over and over again. So a lot of people asked him when he was here, how do I promote myself? How do I get myself out there? How do I use the social media stuff? And Jeff's answer all the time was, don't worry about that stuff. Master your craft. And I think you seconded that just with what you said. Worry about the writing. Worry about doing the work. And then put yourself in front of the people. And I think that was really, really good. A good takeaway for a lot of people.
Yeah, time and again, I get asked that same question, and it's not just myself or Jeff Johns, but it's across the industry. You'll hear the same sentiments echoed. How do I break into comics? You break into comics by making comics. You don't break into comics by thinking about it or by having a really great website. You break into comics by making comics. So, I mean, it sounds simple, and it kind of is. It's just really time consuming, and you have to make the time to do it.
Thank you so much for all of your hard effort at making the future of comics happen here at MSU. I tell you, your students and your alumni are the people that put together our MSU comic. They are the ones that submitted the most beautiful work, and they rave on about you. So you're doing a really good job here. Thank you for that. And thank you for your time with us today. I really appreciate you. All of the good stuff that you gave us.
Well, thank you so much for all the kind words. I'm super humbled by that, and thank you so much for having me here today.
It was great. It was a great time. So for those of you listening, thank you so much for being with us. Don't forget, we're recording this. If you'd like a copy, you could just give Brenda an email, Haynesb, it's HAYNESB @msu.edu, and she'll send you a copy of that. And tune in later. We do professional series workshops every other Thursday at 12:30 Eastern Standard Time. So thank you very much, and go green.